Welcome, modelers. In this update, I will show you how I managed to wire up 145 SMDs for the lights on A deck and how I installed the I-beam detail under the A deck roof and some modifications on the A deck. This is part 11 of my Trumpeter 1 to 200 scale Titanic build series. The first thing I needed to do was to make the roof of the A deck flat where the lights and I-beams would be applied. So I had to shave off the ridges where one would put the LED strips on the A deck roof per the kit instructions. You also note that there are dimples along the roof of A deck. Why Trumpeter molded this part this way is beyond me, but to get a smooth surface I had to fill these dimples in with putty. I just used the red auto putty to do this. In some areas on this roof of the A deck I needed to add a 40 thousandths thick plastic strip to level the surface of the roof of A deck. Now the picture shows the first area I had to do this, which is right aft of the forward stairway. And then the next picture shows the other area I had to do this, which is in front of the aft stairway. You will also note that in the picture I drew the outline of the A deck housings on the roof of the A deck. Now these are part numbers T1 and part U1. By drawing where the A deck housings are located with reference to the A deck roof, I could get a good idea how to lay out the I-beams that one saw on the real Titanic. Adding these I-beams is tedious work and amounted to adding 318 small pieces of plastic, but it adds a nice detail to the model. After painting the A deck housing satin white, I installed the photo etch windows. Now the Pontos photo etch windows have better detail than the Trumpeter photo etch windows. As you can see in the picture here where I compared some of the windows, and the Trumpeter kit windows look very plain compared to the Pontos kit windows. So I just used the Pontos kit windows for the A deck. Now when I got to the first class smoking room area of part U1 and the first class lounge area of part T1, I noticed that the windows that are sitting at an angle were not open much. So I just used a grinder to open up the windows so more light will shine through them. And the arrows in the picture here show before and after views of two of those angled windows. Next up was a modification to the rearmost A deck housing. That's this here. This is part U1. Now here, the outer doors facing aft, there's one here and then one on the starboard side. They're just molded into the housing wall. Now the Pontos kit has a part, it's E16, so that one can cut out the molded doors in the original kit and then replace them with the photo etch doors that you see in the video here for a better detailed look. Now on the Titanic these were sliding glass doors. Now this first picture shows my first rough cut for the port side door. Now I cut as close as I could to the window edge safely. Then I filed the rest down to get the right shape and width for the door opening. Then finally I cut slots into the wall so that I could slide the photo etch door into position. And then using some micro crystal clear glue, the doors were permanently fixed in position and provided the appearance of glass for the doors. Now the end result is a nice fit with the doors flush to the bottom of the A deck housing part. Next it was time to add the I-beams to the roof of A deck. Now in the photo you'll see this picture here of the Olympic right on A deck, and this was basically the same setup as the Titanic, but you'll notice that the A deck area had an open beam type of design, so you can see all the I-beams underneath there. And to get the proper placing of the I-beams, there are two references that I use. On the website titanic-cad-plans.com, on the home page there is a diagram under the heading Drawing of the Structures on the Underside of Titanic's Boat Deck. And then the other reference that I used was here in this book entitled RMS Titanic, a Model Maker's Manual. And on page 83 there is the start of some diagrams. This is chapter 9, the promenade deck. And from page 83 on you have some detailed plans showing the various sections of A deck and the position of the I-beams. So these are the two references that I use so that I get the proper placement of the I-beams. Okay, so to start figuring out where these I-beams are placed, the first thing I did was to put the boat deck upside down on the superstructure. And this basically is putting the A deck roof facing up. So here I have the boat deck upside down, and this here is the roof of the A deck. Now I knew that the I-beams all faced or lined up with all these support posts. So there's an I-beam to each post. So that gave me a good reference to where to begin to mark in pencil on the A deck roof where these posts line up. I drew a line. Now each one of these posts is about 14 millimeters on center from the next post. So the area where the A deck is enclosed, where you don't really have any posts, which is near the front of the ship in this area here, I couldn't use posts as a reference. But since I knew that these posts here are 14 millimeters apart, I just kept going 14 millimeters every 14 millimeters and drew a line, and that gave me a good reference to where to put the I-beams on the area of the promenade deck that's enclosed toward the front of the ship. Okay, so from the above references I knew I had two additional I-beams that sat in between each post. So you would have an I-beam that lined up with this post, then two more I-beams, then another I-beam with this post, and so on all the way to the forward part of the promenade deck. So that basically meant that each I-beam was about 4.5 millimeters apart. So just using a ruler, I just marked around that 4.5 millimeter mark and then close to the 9 millimeter mark, and that gave me a rough idea where each I-beam should be placed. Now the picture shows the lines I drew for the I-beams that sit every 14 millimeters to match where the outer posts would be, and the two little dots in between these lines represents where the other I-beam sat. The big dot you see in the picture represents where the lights would be. And when all the lines were laid out on the roof of A deck, they lined up perfectly from beginning to the end of the A deck. There were no odd spaces that were created by mismeasurement, so everything seemed to line up just right. Okay, earlier I had mentioned that in the picture I was showing, I had showed that I had drawn the outline of the A deck housings to the roof of A deck. Now the way that I got those drawings accurately was I put the A-deck housings in place, and then I put the boat deck on top. And as you can see, the boat deck has a lot of holes in it. And a lot of these holes match right up with the housings underneath that are the A-deck housings. So what I did was I just put tape around these areas to tape them all together and make a nice fitting. So then when I pulled this all off, the housings stayed put onto the boat deck part here. And then I just flipped that over, and then I just traced an outline of all those housings, and then that's how I got exactly where on this model the housings would match up to the A-deck roof. And this gave me a good reference so that I could get the length of each I-beam correct without it running into the roof or the A-deck housings. Now, I glued the I-beams using microcrystal clear glue. And then once the I-beams were all in place, I painted the roof of the A-deck a satin white color. And then this also helped to act as a glue to help keep the 318 I-beams in place. Next up was adding 72 soft white 402 SMDs to the roof of A-deck. The placing of the lights also came from the same references I used for the I-beams. The two references did not agree on every light location, so I chose which locations that I preferred. I did not place a light at every place shown on the diagrams. I figured 72 lights were plenty to light this ship. Now, most of the 72 SMDs were wired in groups of 6 to one 1500 ohm resistor to again keep the lights from burning too bright. Now, to hide the wires, what I did was I used white craft paint to make these wires blend in with the roof. Now, I tried to use model paint, but it just wouldn't adhere or stick to the wires. But when I used the craft paint, it went on fine. Alright, so now the next problem to solve was how to fit all this together. If you look at where the wires are, there's hot glue spots. You can see the resistors, and they all stick up a little too high. So let me show you how I took care of that clearance problem. Alright, you will notice on the A-deck housings I ended up either putting some holes in the housings or carving some grooves in them. And this is what took so long. I had to figure out exactly where to put these grooves or dimples into the housing roof so that I could clear the hot glue spots and some of the resistors. And then I also, where the area was raised, made little grooves so that the wires could go through onto the housings without lifting up the A-deck roof and having some light leaks. Now, I did this for the front as well. Just carved out a couple spots that all correspond to high spots that created clearance problems. And once that was all done, I just test fitted everything, and the A-deck roof fits real nice on top of the housings without any clearance problems. The next thing I did was I needed to create two more electrical junctions. You remove the housings here. And I just created these junction points just using some aluminum tape. And another one up front. This is kind of where all the main wires come together. So instead of having just a mess of wires in this one location, I just made some more junctions so that the wires would be a little bit more organized and easier to put together. Next, it was time to wire up the housings, and to do that I just used some SMD tape that had 805 SMDs to it. And you can see here's part U1. This is the rear A-deck housing unit, and I just wired things up there. I did put some SMDs, 402 SMDs, around where the rear stairwell dome light would be, so that kind of will light that area up. And that took care of that part. And then the forward A-deck housing assembly, again I just added some 805 SMD strips and wired them all up. And that worked out relatively easy. Now there's one peculiar thing that I found with the model. If you notice here on part U1, the rear unit of the A-deck housing, you notice that there is a notch here. This was just a notch in the housing unit. Why Trumpeter put a notch there that was all open, I have no idea. I didn't see any kind of notch or anything in the pictures of Olympic or Titanic, so I just filled it in as best as I could. It's not perfect. I have to do a little more fine-tuning yet with it, but if anybody can figure out why that notch is there, let me know. But I just sealed it off so that I have a solid wall. Now if one is going to do the I-beam details, there's one thing to consider. Is these posts that fit in, there's one here, one goes over here, and then a larger one goes over here. These posts here are going to be too long or sit too high, and what you're going to have to do, and what I have here in the photo, is going to have to sand them down about 20 thousandths of an inch. And I have one that I sanded down compared to one that I hadn't touched yet, and that gives you an idea of the difference, so that these posts will clear those I-beams. And actually the way this is laid out is the way it actually would be on the ship, because these posts actually served to support some of those I-beams in these areas of the ship that had a wide open space. So that, again, that worked out pretty good. Now one other detail that I did add was some of the water pipes that run under the A-deck roof. And you can see here I have these water pipes added. Now what I used was, I used 40 thousandths inch rod plastic strips, and I just heated them up to bend them correctly, and I just added a couple. There's actually a little bit more than this, and there's also a venting system that you could add if you wanted to even add more detail, but that's kind of beyond my patience and skill. So I just settled with these water pipes, and these also came from the references that I used for the I-beams and the light placements. So next, let me wire everything up to power and we'll see what this looks like all finished. Okay, and here's the final result. And you can see all the lights. It seems to turn out just the right brightness. So I think that's pretty good. I do have to put some lighting in this section right here. The windows, I don't have any lights behind them in here. But I don't know, they might be good enough without any additional lights, but we'll see what this looks like on the computer. But that's it. That basically finishes A deck. There's a few minor things to do yet, but I think A deck is finished. Alright, well that should do it. So until the next update, have a great day.